On this episode of Still Loading, welcome to Dubai, gentlemen. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, it is the first ever patron poll episode. For the first time in the history of the podcast, I put a poll out to the patrons, asked them, I gave them 4 games that I was interested in playing for the first time, and it actually was a tie between Spec Ops: The Line, the game we are talking about today, and Siphon Filter for the PS1, and it was a tie. So I had to flip a coin, and it ended up going to Spec Ops: The Line. I even did best 2 out of 3 just to be certain, and Spec Ops: The Line was the actually it won all 3 on that one. So there we go. I was even curious after the 2 I could have stopped. I'm like, well, let's go with the third one, and it is Spec Ops: The Line won again. So we are here to talk about Spec Ops: The Line for the PS3. And I don't know, was it ever released for something? Oh, also 360 and Windows. And joining me today to talk about this game, this kind of under the radar third-person shooter, is Dave from Tales from the Backlog. Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Josh. Thank you for inviting me back on the show, especially for this game. I love talking about this game.
I feel like this game is something that is not talked about enough. And actually, you did an episode on this game already last year. Mm-hmm. And full disclosure for you, sir, I have not listened to it yet. Not because I don't want to. I'm actually probably going to listen to it tomorrow. But I didn't want to listen to your guys' points and then just regurgitate them for this episode. So I specifically avoided it for this episode. But fun fact: one of the patrons who voted for this game was your guest for that episode, Chris Copeland. Yeah. So, Chris, this episode's for you, buddy. We are talking about Spec Ops: The Line, developed by Jaeger Development, which is kind of seems a little redundant, but fair enough. Jaeger, published by 2K Games, and it came out on June 6th, 2012. What did you play this on? Just out of curiosity, did you play this on a PS3, a 360, a Windows? What did you play it on?
So actually, I might be the only person who played this game this way, but I played this on PS Now on the PS4.
Okay.
And keep in mind that they don't allow you to play PS3 games natively on that service. So I played this via streaming. On the PS4. Both times I played this game, I streamed it over like their streaming service, and it worked well enough for me to get through it.
Okay, I did not know that this was even available in that fashion, like that you could play it over a streaming service. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's not available that way anymore. Like I don't think it's on the PS Plus that it is now, but back then, the last time I played this last year, it was on PS Now. I played it twice in 1 year on that service.
So did you play it for the first time last year before you recorded the episode then, I'm assuming?
Yeah, the first time was not for my episode of the show, but it was 8 months before that. Mm-hmm. So I played this for the first time probably in 2021, something like that. Yeah.
All right. So what was your experience with this game, and how did you discover it?
So it's odd because when it first came out, I didn't hear about it at all. I was playing a lot of games, but I just didn't hear about this. And then this cover is very familiar to me. So I know that this is a game where I went to GameStop, I saw it on the shelf. I thought, oh, another military shooter. I don't really like those, so I'm not buying that. And it just kind of every time you go to GameStop, you see some of those covers on the shelf, you never buy them. And that's just how that game is to you until 2020, 2019, something like that. I listened to a podcast I really love, Watch Out for Fireballs. They did an episode on this in their back catalog. and they were talking about how good it was and how it was more than meets the eye. And so it kind of got on my radar to like actually give it a serious shot. And then I went on the PS Now, I saw that it was on there, and I was like, all right, hell yeah, let's do it.
Okay. See, I have a little bit different of an entry into the series, into this. I actually bought this game not brand new. I bought it pre-owned from GameStop. I think back when I worked there. I worked at GameStop over a decade ago. And I bought it, I think, shortly after it came out. I want to say 2014 or 2015. I bought it pre-owned. But I remember when this game came out, I remember hearing rumblings about it where it was like, this game has a really good story. And it's not like it. The only thing I knew about it, and I don't think this spoils anything because it didn't spoil it for me, is that it's a game that relies on decision making, kind of like almost like a morality system, but the catch is no decision is really a good one. It's like when you're thrust in, and this game really explores that idea of semi Kobayashi Maru-ish, like from Star Trek, where it's the unwinnable situation. It's kind of got a little bit of that vibes to it, but that does a disservice to what this game ends up doing, and we'll get into all that. I'm actually, I told you this off mic. I'm going to be taking a cue from your show, and we're going to be putting up a spoiler wall, a little ways into this episode. But that was my only experience with this game prior to playing it for this episode. Is that I bought it, always really intended to play it. It was one of those things where I popped the game in, played maybe 5 minutes of it, and just stopped for no reason in particular. I genuinely don't know why I just kind of stopped, but I did. And I think I just wasn't in a shooter mood, and I didn't really touch it until I was like, you know what? I've been meaning to do this game for a while. I saw that you did an episode on it. I'm like, man, I would really like to. It just kind of reminded me of it again. I was like, man, I really need to sit down and play this. So I let fate decide. I put it up on the Patreon poll, and that's kind of how this all came about. I think it is worth going into a little bit of the history of this game, and I don't have a whole lot on the development of this. A lot of the stuff I was able to look up, the story was inspired by Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I believe that's what they meant by that. They just kept saying Heart of Darkness. They didn't mention if it was the book or the video game. I'm assuming the book, though. That seems more applicable than the game, but it's based off that. The reason the game takes place in Dubai for a lot of game design reasons. It added a lot of verticality to the shooting sections, and it added a lot of variety because Dubai is kind of like a city out of place. Like, it's this majestic, beautiful location in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a desert. And they use it. They talk about how it kind of ties a little bit into the story, but it wasn't fully their intention. But it's a city that kind of defies the desert. Like, there's almost hubris to the city itself, which I think is kind of interesting and kind of a cool idea. So that is just some of the, there's more to it as well that we'll get into as we talk about the game and talk about the story, but I couldn't find a whole lot on the development itself. I actually read like 3 or 4 different developer interviews and watched some behind the scenes stuff, but nothing really stuck out as like crazy interesting. It was a lot of like marketing fluff pieces. With that said, I'm sure there's some good tidbits out there. In fact, there's a lot of good info on Wikipedia, and I actually went to Wikipedia. I would look at their sources and then read the sources, which was some of the interviews, which gave a lot more insight than what you saw in the Wikipedia article, which was cool. But what I want to talk about next is just the kind of state of shooters in 2012. Now, you said you're not a big fan of military shooters, though.
No, I'm not. So I played a lot of Call of Duty 4, I think it was, back in like 2007 or something like that. I played so much that I kind of burned myself out on it, and then I pretty quickly like just lost interest in them in general, like as game experiences, like the multiplayer military shooter, just really lost my interest. And then I also started to develop the opinion that stuff like Call of Duty is a game with like military join the military rah-rah propaganda inside of it. And I really hate that so much. So I have not played a Call of Duty game since, and any game that like takes place where you're like an army dude is really like gives me pause and like whether I actually want to play it or not. So in 2012, I might have heard that this was coming out, and I'd heard of the Spec Ops series, but I'd never played one because at that point it had been 5 years since I played any military shooter, and I don't really play other than the Fallout games at the time, Fallout 3 and New Vegas. I wasn't playing first person shooters in general.
Okay, that's fair. And I can totally see that, especially with later Call of Duties and like Battlefields. And it's very, specifically with Call of Duty, just because of the title, it is kind of very, oorah, go military. And like, listen, I respect veterans and I respect the military to an extent, but I also don't like, I'm kind of with you on the glorification of war almost, right, and the glorification of the military, which, yeah, it's a whole thing. I'm not trying to insult anyone who has served. I have lots of friends who are veterans, but right. I do think it's strange to glorify war.
Yeah, and like from what I understand, there have been some Call of Duty games since then that have like told stories about, the bad parts of war and not like just the glory and stuff like that. And if they're telling stories like that, then that's cool. I commend them for doing so. But the main reason most people buy a Call of Duty game is to play online and kill some people in their spare time and talk shit and stuff like that. So
I'm not a multiplayer guy either, so that ruins it for me.
Yeah, same. So like I know that some of the more recent ones like do have pretty decent stories and campaigns, but like I'm just not going to play them because I have literally thousands of other video games that appeal to me more than that. So it's so this game, like Spec Ops The Line, maybe I heard about it when it came out, but it was in one year and out the other because I just like I don't really care for the, like we said, the rah-rah military shooter, trying to get people to, have this like positive association with joining the military. I really feel that, and like it's not a secret, the US military has like partnered with Call of Duty at times in the past. So it's not like this isn't something I'm just making up. It's something that I really think sucks and really turned me off from this genre.
I can understand why. And I think it's funny that we're sitting here, talking about this glorification of the military and shooters at the time. And the person who voted for this game, Chris, is in the military.
Right. And this, I know you said you didn't listen to the episode that we did together, but we did have a little bit of a conversation about how he feels about, number one, about the military shooter, but also how he felt about what this game does with some of those ideas and how they appealed to him.
I am looking forward to hearing his opinions on that episode then, so I will definitely go back and listen to it afterwards. And what I want to say too, about the time that this game came out in 2012, like Call of Duty was at the height of its popularity. This was, I remember the years leading up to this, every year, Call of Duty's breaking sales records. This is wild. Who would have believed it? And every year, the next Call of Duty just kept breaking the previous year's sales records. And it was just going and going and going and going. So when this game came out, and it was just such a different take on the typical military shooter narrative, it was a breath of fresh air. And I think a lot of people, I know it was like really praised at the time in the press for its narrative and like what it did. But I just think because Spec Ops is not the best known series in general. Like if you look at like I have the Spec Ops series Wikipedia open. Excuse me. In the last game in the series this was the last game that was released in the series. It came out in 2012, and there hasn't been another Spec Ops since. Prior to this game, the most recent Spec Ops game before that was in 2002. So there was another decade in between. It was Spec Ops Airborne Commando for the PlayStation, which came out in 2002, and then this one didn't come out until 2012. From my understanding, the Spec Ops games are light on story. It's more of a simulation type of thing than anything else. So it really wasn't like there wasn't really any story per se. I actually have, funny enough, looking at my PS1 collection back there, I do have a copy of one of the original Spec Ops games. I don't know which one it is off the top of my head, but I have a PS1 Spec Ops game. So I should have played it. I was streaming last night, man. I should have played it on stream just so I can see the difference between Spec Ops Align and Spec Ops on the PS1. I bet you besides the graphics, the differences had to be insane, especially considering from, like I said, from what I understand, there's not really much of a story in the original Spec Ops games.
Yeah. And like kind of in that atmosphere in 2012, you know, like Call of Duty is just insane by that point. Spec Ops, the line from like the reviews that I've looked into, it got praise for its story, but also got a lot of criticism because it didn't have a super like awesome multiplayer mode, and people didn't think the gameplay was that good. And I assume we're going to talk about the gameplay at some point here, but like the one, like as much as I talk shit about Call of Duty earlier, you can't deny that it feels really good to play those games. They're fun to play. And Spec Ops The Line is not as fun from like a gunplay perspective. And I think that it did get some criticism because of that. And then like it was of the time where it's like you have this shooter. Why do you not have like this great multiplayer mode?
Every shooter needed multiplayer back then. It was like inexcusable at the time. Meanwhile, I was one of the few people who was like, stop making everything multiplayer. Like
I'm still saying that. I'm pounding the drum for single player games until I die.
I mean, thankfully, single player games have made a big comeback in the last decade or so. But like, you know, I want to say like from, you know, pretty much from Modern Warfare back in like 2006, I think is when the first Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out. From 2006 to like 2014 or 2015, it was like if you don't have multiplayer in your game, it's screwed. And there was a couple games that came along and kind of broke that mold. I would say Last of Us really helped with that a lot. But like you even saw it in Uncharted. They added multiplayer to Uncharted. Now, with that said, I actually kind of love the multiplayer in Uncharted. I played a lot of it. Not necessarily.
And there's
online,
a lot of people. Like, there's a lot of people who love the Last of Us multiplayer too. So
I forgot Last of Us had multiplayer as well. Everyone says that was really good too. I forgot. I completely forgot about that. It ruins my entire point.
Well, it's like the Last of Us got its success on the basis of its story and its single player mode, and then people were like, "Oh, by the way, like, you know, the sneaky thing is that the multiplayer is actually really good too." But I still hear this today for like single player games, and people are like, why is there not a multiplayer? And I'm like, this game doesn't need a multiplayer. It doesn't. Why can't we just play single player games? There's a million multiplayer games.
And in all honesty, especially with games as a service now, there's too many things vying for your entire life, you know?
Yes.
You have to spend your life in Fortnite, spend your life in fucking PUBG, spend your life in fucking Call of Duty Warzone or whatever the fuck. There's so many things vying. The games as a service is vying for, it's all attention based. But you mentioned about some of the gameplay being kind of somewhat generic. I guess I don't know. I never really had an issue with it. I think because I played a lot on my PS3, and the PS3, as much as I love it, there was some jankiness to a lot of the PS3 ports to a lot of different games. So I never really, so like when I played this on the PS3, it wasn't that janky compared to other games. So I was like, when you were saying like it was kind of a subpar shooter, I'm like, I don't know if it's subpar. I think it's just fine. I think it's good. Like, I think saying it's like it's just okay is doing it a disservice, because it's on a technical level it's serviceable, but it's good. Like the combat is satisfying. It's a little wonky at times. What I do think that they did that was kind of fun is that they used a lot more environmental stuff to your advantage. Like a lot of first-person shooters, here's some explosive barrels, and then you shoot them and they explode, and that's about all that. Maybe it'll blow up a vehicle at the same time. But in this game, one of the big elements to it is the sandstorm. We'll get into the setup of the story in a little bit, but for all that you need to know for those who have not played it yet, you're playing as a group of commandos going into the city of Dubai that is pretty much consumed by this ever persisting sandstorm that has been going on for months on end. Multiple sandstorms are hitting this city, and they're all converging at the same time. Once we get to the plot, we'll get into why it's all there. But for the people who have not played it, that's what you're doing. And so they use the sandstorm and sand in general in a lot of different mechanics. It was very intentional that sand would to be used. Like, so if you threw a grenade, even if you didn't hit anybody, it would create a plume of sand, so you could use it as like visual cover to go hide behind like other in some other item, or not item, sorry, some other obstacle or some other barrier to hide from the enemy. You could, if you were inside and you saw sand pressing against a window, you could shoot the windows out and the sand would come in and just swallow up the enemy soldiers. There was a lot of really cool ideas that they incorporated. I feel like they did a really good job of using the environment around you to allow you to do different things. And additionally, by having I never used it, but apparently you can control your squad mates. It's you and two other soldiers, and you can control your squad mates. And the AI for them is really fucking good. You don't really need to control them. They kind of can do their own thing, and they don't die easily. I've been kind of going on. What are your thoughts, though?
Yeah, so just to clarify, like the review opinion, like the consensus on the reviews is that the gameplay is not very good, and that's kind of out there in the water. And like if you want to compare it to, you know, a Titanfall or a Call of Duty or something like that, yeah, it's not as, you know, kinetically fun to play, but it's good. It's fine. Like I have enough fun playing this as a third-person cover shooter, as much fun as I have playing, you know, the combat sections in Uncharted or something like that. Like it's the idea that the gameplay here is shit is awful. Like it's not it's just not true. It's fine. And like you said, the AI for the enemies, you know, they'll flank you, they'll sneak up on you. The enemies are not stupid, and then your teammates, like you said, you can issue commands to them. They'll take care of business, whatever you tell them to do. Like you're a team of like these professional soldiers. So like if you tell your teammate like, hey, take that guy out, they'll do it, and they'll do it effectively. And sometimes it's really helpful when you have enemies at like several different distances. Maybe you have someone on a turret or a sniper somewhere, and it's really handy just to give those commands.
I also think that, so it's funny. I want to dare to say that the gameplay is actually just like, it's better than good. I'm not saying it's great, but like to me, like, so, okay, Call of Duty gameplay isn't great. It's good. It's solid. Like you said, it's kinetic. I think the big difference between Spec Ops: The Line and Call of Duty is the pace of combat. Call of Duty is twitch reflexes. It's very frenetic. It's not only kinetic, but it's also frenetic. You know, you're all over the place. You're you know, especially if you're playing on mouse and keyboard, you know, you're flinging the mouse over one way, you're looking at it the other way. Like it's a lot of twitch reflexes, and it's the same even playing on home console. Spec Ops: The Line, I never felt like it was twitch reflex based. It always felt more intentional. Like when you're playing through it, you do have to have some twitch reflexes when something surprises you, but for the most part it never feels like enemies are just coming out of the fucking sky like they do in Call of Duty. Like enemies come all over the place. Sorry.
Phrasing.
Yeah, phrasing. Who knows if I'll keep that in? If you're hearing this now, it's staying in the edit. Enemies show up all over the place in Call of Duty, and in Spec Ops: The Line, it feels like you hear them coming, or you see them coming, or you know, you see them at a distance, and it doesn't feel like you're necessarily surprised as much, but that's not a bad thing because the enemies are tough. Like they have, like you said, they have calculated moves. There's a lot of times, especially kind of towards the end of the game, where like they start adding a little bit more variety to the enemies with some of the heavier enemies and like bomb suits and stuff like that, where I was getting mad. Like you can watch VODs on my Twitch channel of me just getting pissed off because I kept dying in the same spot. But what made the game better is that they're very generous with their checkpoints. And there's like, they'll have a checkpoint right before a tough spot. If they don't, then it's not that far behind there. You may have to watch a cutscene every now and then, but you can also skip the cutscenes every single time, which is also really handy. So it really kind of it really kind of works around where, like, if you die a lot, it doesn't take a whole lot. It respects your time to get back to the area that you were, and you can try again. And I like a game that respects my time, where it's not just making me do the same shit over and over and over again just to get to the spot that I was stuck at. And I always kind of respect that. They don't dumb it down for me. They just make it so I don't have to waste my time leading to do something again that I've already proven I can do. Especially in shooters like this, where you don't really have health. You know, you just kind of hide behind cover until the blood goes away.
Right, exactly. Speaking of not, wasting your time or demanding too much of your time, this game's not very long. Like, I don't know how long your playthrough took you, but like for me, 4 or 5 hours.
Oh, you're fast.
Is my average playthrough. Also, I will say I played this game on easy both times I played it.
Okay.
I am a easy mode person, especially in shooters, because I don't think that most shooters do difficulty in an interesting way. They just make enemies take longer to kill. So I put most shooters on easy. If I play a couple levels, I'm like, oh, it's a bullet sponge game, then I'm putting it on easy. I'm not playing Spec Ops: The Line for a challenge anyway. So easy mode.
I played it on medium, or like the median difficulty, and I had a good time with it. I really did enjoy the challenge. And even if I was getting completely pissed off, like I don't get mad often in general, but this game really I was trying so hard not to scream because my kid is right next door, and I always stream after she goes to sleep, so it's like impossible to like let my anger out in a productive way. The difficulty was never too much for me with this. I thought in general it was just really well paced. I thought I don't know, it still just blows my mind that the gameplay was criticized so much. I just think it's different gameplay than what people were used to. Like, I think it's actually really good. I think it's a good third-person shooter. Because I've played a decent number. Like, it's funny. I actually think the original Gears of War is more boring than this.
Like, people would point to Gears of War. Like, I've played all the Uncharted games. I like the gunplay and fighting in Spec Ops: The Line more than any Uncharted game until Uncharted 4. Like, it's not like this. It's not like this is at the bottom of the barrel as far as third-person shooters go. It's fine. It's good enough, I think. Like, it's fun sometimes, and when it's not super fun, well, most third-person shooters aren't fun all the time. So, at least for me, like, combat-wise. So it's good enough to get you from point to point. And then, like I said, like, this game took me 5 hours to play both times. So, like, even if I was getting sick of the combat, the game's almost over. So,
and I do think the combat itself I don't know, the combat didn't get, I didn't get sick of the combat, but I can see what you're saying. And I think you're right. This combat I kind of enjoyed more than Uncharted, and it kills my soul to say that because I love the Uncharted games. They're some of my favorite games.
Me too.
But this one, I just find it so bizarre that this gameplay was criticized by critics at the time, or it was panned by critics. No, I shouldn't say panned. It was one of the lesser points for critics at the time. One of their sticking points they didn't really like as much. And I do think in 2012, when this game came out, frenetic action was more of a thing. It was much more common to see. Like, one of my personal favorite games, BioShock Infinite. I know that game gets shit on a lot now. It kind of bothers me because I really like that game. That game was frenetic and crazy, and it was all over the place. And that came out a year later, to be fair, but still, it's kind of all in that same time. So when you have a little bit more deliberate pace of a shooter, which is still chaotic, but it doesn't feel nearly as twitch reflexy, So I don't know. I find it odd that they criticize it so much, but I just think it's not what they were looking for at the time. And that's fair. Everyone's, entitled to their, like, I bet you when I play this game in another 10 years, I might have a different opinion of the gameplay. Maybe it'll be too fast for me. And then I'll be like, yeah, the critics were right. This isn't as good. But
make it slower, even slower.
I know, right? Just make it slower. So I don't have much more to say about the gameplay itself, because I didn't play the multiplayer, so I can't really comment too much on that. And I said at the beginning of the episode, I was going to take a little bit of a cue from your show and do a spoiler wall. And normally I, kind of give a light spoiler wall. I say, okay, here's the spoilers from here on out, just as a forewarning. If you have not played Spec Ops: The Line yet, this is, I think, the most important spoiler wall I can give. This game's narrative is why it's known, regardless of what we've said about the gameplay, which we both think is at least good to serviceable to good. The thing that really sets this game apart from the rest of its competitors and its contemporaries at the time is its narrative, because it was doing something with narrative that you have not seen in games at the time, and honestly you don't really see it all that much now, in terms of military shooters at least.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't play military shooters, so maybe games are doing this.
Actually, no, that's true. I don't play military shooters. I shouldn't say definitively, right?
So maybe they are, and I'm just not hearing about it. But I mean, I talk to people about video games every day. I would have felt like if there was another Spec Ops: The Line out there, I would have heard about it. Like this, it wouldn't be a secret. I think that video games are starting to explore the things that the story does in Spec Ops a little bit more. And I don't want to say what games are doing that right now, because that would kind of spoil what Spec Ops is doing. And it's kind of interesting to like us talk about the gameplay and just generally agree that it's pretty good, and then give like this hearty recommendation right before we start spoilers. But like people listening, you just got to trust us that this is a story that you don't want to be spoiled on. You want to experience this for yourself. It's not a super long game, and if we were to start talking about why the story is so good, this is the problem we had on my show too. Chris was losing his mind trying to talk about it without spoiling it in the non-spoiler part. To talk about why this story is so good would be to get into spoilers that you should experience for yourself. So you're just going to have to trust me, someone who you may or may not know, and trust Josh. You're listening to this, you trust Josh.
Oh, I would even say your endorsement means more because you don't like military shooters. You genuinely don't like these types of games, and that's how good this story was, where it made you even be able to appreciate it because, like you said, not a big fan of them, and that's fair. Like, military shooters in general, like at the time, Call of Duty kind of did a little bit of a revolutionary thing with military shooters. Like Call of Duty 4 had a crazy good story, in my opinion, like a really solid narrative, and it was something that I wasn't expecting at the time. And I'm not going to spoil that because I do intend on doing an episode on Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare at some point. But up until that point, military shooters didn't have strong narratives. Like I love the Medal of Honor games. The narratives were not great. They were very loose. Like it was kind of like, here's a character. There's no really character development for them, but here's them going through the war and doing different missions. Like, oh, isn't this cool? You're in Operation Market Garden. Isn't this cool? You're on Normandy Beach.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it was giving you set pieces in the war, which in a weird sense kind of glorified World War II in an odd sense, but at the same I don't know. We won't go into that one. I love the Medal of Honor games so much, and but they're very much they're a very different feel than what military shooters would become, and like I said, Spec Ops: The Line the story is just like at that point I had never seen a military shooter do anything like the story that this game tells. Like have a story that this game tells. And even though I didn't play at the time, I'm remembering back to what I was doing in 2012 and like what games I was playing in 2012. And you didn't see stories like this in games in 2012. So, so yeah, I think we should put up the hard spoiler wall right now. Listeners, if you have not played this game and you want to experience it, like Dave said, it is a short experience. It is worth your time. It is a very good game. The gameplay is fun. It's a good shooter, and the story is worth the wait. So with that said, actually, I'm going to take one other cue from yours, just in case anyone does stop here. I don't normally do this. I'm making an exception for this episode. That's how hard of a spoiler wall this is. Dave, a quick shout out for your own show and your socials. This is a very early spoiler wall, but I at least want to make sure I include this here so people can find you if they do decide to stop listening to this episode so they can go play it.
Sure, I appreciate it. So my show is called Tales from the Backlog, and every week is a game review. But as the name might suggest, we're doing games from the backlog, not necessarily new games, although I do a bunch of new games every year, but it might be one new game per month and then 3 backlog games and stuff like that. And we've been talking about spoiler walls and stuff like that. So that's the kind of like the key point that my show is built around, is that the first half of the show is a deep dive on gameplay, story, soundtrack, stuff like that, with no spoilers. So that, let's say you did not play Spec Ops The Line or Disco Elysium or Bloodborne or any of these other wonderful games I've covered on the show. Chrono Trigger, that Josh was on my show for, talking about Chrono Trigger. If you haven't played that, you can listen to a podcast, a deep level podcast about it, and not be spoiled. And then we put up that hard spoiler wall. So if you want to get out and avoid spoilers, you can. And then after that, we dive into the story, or, big gameplay spoilers if it's that kind of game. So that's Tales from the Backlog. And like I said, Josh was a guest on my episode about Chrono Trigger. So if you're looking for a good place to start, you can start there, or find a game that you've been interested in hearing what makes it special, but maybe you didn't play it and you don't want to be spoiled. That's literally the reason my show is built the way it is.
And I highly recommend that show. Like I said in the Final Fantasy IX episode, some of my favorite in-depth dives into video games. So definitely go check out Dave's podcast. And with that said, I don't do music cues like everyone else's show. So there's spoiler wall. I'm just going to go with the McDonald's jingle on this one. Here we are to talk about the story for Spec Ops The Line. And there's a lot to go into. I don't know if I want to go beat by beat.
Where do we even start?
I think
one thing to start with. All right, so I was going to bring this up in the gameplay section and I didn't, but there's another part of the gameplay that is kind of integral to one of the things they want you to notice as you're playing this game. So this is a game about people going way too far, and then rationalizing to themselves why that's okay, why they needed to do that, and why they had no choice and they had to do what they did. In my opinion, that's one of the big themes they're touching on here. And one thing about the gameplay is, after you shoot an enemy, a lot of times they don't just die from the gunshots. They will be on the ground, writhing in pain. And one of the things they teach you is you can go up, you can press a quick QTE. I think you press circle on PlayStation, and you'll do this execution move. Yeah. And if you kill them using this brutal execution move, you bash their face in with the butt of your gun, or you curb stomp them or something. It's violent. That's how you get extra ammo. But if you mercy kill them, if you shoot them when they're on the ground writhing in pain, you don't get anything. And it's the game encouraging you to be as brutal as you can as you go through these. And as you play through the game, and as your characters, especially Walker, kind of lose it and lose themselves, these execution moves get more and more violent as you go. And so it's kind of emblematic of what's happening to your character. And then the things that are happening in the story around it kind of feed into that too, because you're doing terrible things and Walker is just continually rationalizing everything he does. And these execution moves were a nice little gameplay way to see and feel how far your character has gone.
They also the dialogue that they say as they're fighting and doing stuff, it changes as the game goes on too. It starts off with Tango on the right or something like that. Very straight up military. No emotion,
very professional.
just very professional, very tactical.
Yeah. Enemy down.
Yeah,
very matter of fact like that. And then at the end, he's screaming. His voice is hoarse. He's like, he's done, like that.
Yeah.
Did you know there's an unconfirmed story about the voice acting in this game. That the voice actors, I believe it's Nolan North that does the voice of Walker.
He's the voice of the main character, Captain Martin Walker. Nolan North. Yep.
Right. And then your two squad mates, Lugo and Adams. The story is that they recorded this together in chronological order, which is apparently not the way that voice acting is normally recorded.
Yeah, not normally.
So that by the end of the recording session, their voices are hoarse, they're pissed off, they're annoyed, they're frustrated, they want to go home, and you can hear it in their voices. And if that's not true, then it's an extra good job of voice acting. Because, like you said, as the game goes along, you can hear it in their voice. Their voices are hoarse. They are much more aggressive, much more impersonal with everything they're talking about. It's masterful voice acting. But then, if that unconfirmed story is true about them all doing it together in that order, then that's like a brilliant director's decision.
Yeah,
you know.
My buddy Lucas Agan from Land Parties Pod has had Nolan North on his podcast. I wonder if he could reach out to him and ask him, because I've actually tweeted at Nolan North a bunch of times. I tried to tweeting him pictures of my dog, my puppy, in the hope to guilt trip him into coming onto the show. It hasn't worked though. Nolan, please come on. I love you. But I think to kind of go into the story a bit further, the setting of the game, it takes place in Dubai, in kind of almost like a fictional version of the war in Iraq, or I guess is Dubai's not in Iraq. Is it close to Iraq? I don't know geography in the Middle East.
No, it's well, I mean, it's in the same region, but not.
It's
not
at the
generally
United
close.
Arab Emirates, right? The UAE,
right?
Or
It's
whatever.
in the UAE, right next to Saudi Arabia.
So,
down
okay,
on
there
that,
we go.
That little block there.
I knew it was in the UAE, but I could not remember what country was next to the UAE. I just remember.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. So yeah, it takes place in this kind of a fictional war in the Middle East, or a fictionalized version of the war in the Middle East, and you go to the city of Dubai as it's you. You play as Captain Martin Walker, and then his his lieutenant Alfonso Adams and his sergeant John Lugo, and you are going there because it kind of gives a little bit of a backstory where there was, the war had been going on. There was a bunch of sandstorms that were about to come in and converge on Dubai. So a different military leader, Lieutenant Colonel John Conrad, volunteered to go in and try to evacuate the city before the sandstorms hit. And it didn't work. He grouped everyone together. He tried to get them out of the city. And this, right when they were trying to get out of the city, the worst sandstorm of them all hits, and they all get pushed back in to the city. And that's the last you really hear of. Like, you know that they tried to escape, and you know that another sandstorm hit and they haven't come out yet, but you don't really know what exactly happened. Like, was the sandstorm too strong? Did something else occur? Because then it's been radio silence from them, I think, for like 6 months, they say, or something like that. And then all of a sudden you get a radio signal from Colonel Conrad. I forget what exactly the radio signal says, but essentially you are sent in as a little bit of a recon to see what the hell is happening in Dubai. And that's kind of the setup for the story.
Yeah, your mission at the beginning of the game is to locate survivors. That's it. That's all your mission is. And so once you find that distress call, I believe that someone on your crew basically says, like, okay, that's our mission. Now we head back. And of course they don't. They push on because Walker has a personal connection with Conrad from a previous conflict or something like that.
Yes, he respects Conrad. Like he
yeah, it's like a role model.
Yeah,
of his.
Conrad's a role model of his, and he wants to help him.
Yeah, so they push on well past the scope of their mission. Like within a half hour, you're way past what your mission was supposed to be, and it starts this tunnel vision from Walker that he exhibits throughout the entire game. And as the situation gets worse and worse, his tunnel vision gets narrower and narrower as you go.
And this is like like you were saying, it gets narrow. His tunnel vision gets narrower and narrower and narrower. That is a hard word for some reason for me to say. And it begins with kind of like, I mean, that it kind of shows what I was saying before, where no decision ends up really being a good decision. And what I like about it, it's not. Another example of morality systems. At the time, morality systems in the game were like the Paragon system, or basically you do a good deed or you do a bad deed, and you have a gauge, and how far you want to the good scale and how far you want to the bad scale. That's not in Spec Ops: The Line. You're presented with basically they don't tell you what your options are. You just kind of do them, and then if you replay the game and try something different, you'll notice, oh, I could have done that differently. They don't explicitly tell you that you did something. There's a couple moments, like if you play a lot of games, like, okay, this is one of those like delineation moments. Like if I do this, it's going to go, the story's going to go one way, or the game's going to go one way. If I do that, it's going to go a different way.
Yeah, there's I want to say there's like 4 or 5 story moments where you have a choice to make. This is not a branching paths game. Like you're not going to get a different ending just because of a choice you make in the middle of the game. There are different endings based on what you choose at the end, but there are other moments. And one thing I like about it is kind of like you said, the choice is not always evident. And the fact that there is a choice is not always evident to you. So there are some situations where like I did what I thought I had to do in that moment, and then it turned out to be not the case. I had a choice and I chose to do the bad thing because I thought that was the only thing I could do, which I feel like just reinforces one of the main themes of this game super well, using the fact that this is a video game and I'm making the choice along with the character. And this is something that I think this game does really well. The games, I was thinking about this the other day because we were talking about the Nier games in my Discord server, and how a lot of the stories that I think are the best in video games are ones that utilize the fact that I'm an active participant in the story to its advantage. And Spec Ops: The Line really does that, like, so well.
And what I think is cool about it is it doesn't feel like it influences your decision. Like a lot of times when you see a game and there's like, you have a choice. So perfect. Like I mentioned it earlier in the episode, I love BioShock Infinite, but the choices are very clearly, this is an evil choice. This is a good choice. Like in the beginning of the game, you can either be a racist and throw a tomato at an interracial couple, or you can throw it at the racist carnival barker. Like you have one of those 2 options. Which one's the evil one? I wonder.
Right.
It's not.
Or it's like it's like a Mass Effect option where it's like, do you save Caden or do you save Ashley? Pick what you want to do out of the dialogue menu or whatever. Whereas in Spec Ops, there's one scene where they tell you to make a choice, but everything else, it is regular gameplay, and what you choose to do in that gameplay section, that's your choice. Your choice is the character's choice. Like in that moment, it's a fluid thing. It's not, select which one you would like to do from the menu.
No, and that's what I love about it. I believe the first one of these choices that I remember that I was noticing, like, oh, this is a choice, is like as you're going through. Actually, before we get to that choice, what happens when they go into the city, they descend. Walker and his team descend upon the city, and they find it in chaos. Basically, it seems like there are 2 different factions of what's left of the U.S. force in there. One still under Conrad's command, the other under some other dude's command, which I'm blanking on his name off the top of my head right now. I'll try to find it. But under somebody else's command who've kind of like moved. I don't think they actually give that dude a leader, the other side a leader, do they?
No, as far as I remember it, it's like, you think that there are multiple factions of the U.S. military because some of the first enemies you fight in the game are U.S. soldiers, and so when you find that, you're like, oh shit, this is not gone well, and so there are these like rogue soldiers, you feel like, and then you think that there are the good soldiers that are on Conrad's side because you think that Conrad is
the good guy in this, and there's like these evil like dissenters who have like turned the city into chaos.
Right, but your perspective on what's actually happening in the city is so warped that the way that you see the situation is not at all what the reality is. And like maybe we should talk about it. Maybe a little bit later we'll talk about like the nature of reality in this game, because there's something that I wonder if you picked up on. But just talking about the enemies, you're fighting these US soldiers a lot of times because of what you think they're going to do. And a lot of times that gets turned on their head in a way where you're like, you know, maybe 1 or 2 hours into this game, you're going to start getting the feeling like I'm the villain in this game. This is like, I'm the one who's causing all this chaos. And then it continues down that path.
It's funny. I didn't get that feeling. Well, I guess since yours was only 5 hours in, since your playthrough is only 5 hours, 2 to 3 hours in would have been about the moment that I think you're talking about, that maybe you're the villain. Because it's basically, there's a moment halfway through the game where that really becomes apparent. Up until then, I understood that, like, all right, it is a little weird that, like, these soldiers are trying to attack me. I'm not doing anything. But I always, like, up until that middle point, it always felt like I'm just defending myself. You know, I to give a credit to the game's story writing, I was doing the same thing the characters were doing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just defending myself. That's why I'm killing these soldiers, because I'm defending myself. And there is also, like, obviously civilians who still live in the city, and you see graffiti for them all over the place. One of the things that they mentioned that I was able to find, that there is a little, like, graffiti character. There's like a guy, I think, with a gun to his head that you can find on different billboards all throughout the game, and it was kind of like their version of like a little graffiti tag that you could go and kind of see. They use graffiti a lot to do environmental storytelling in this, and in a really good, clever way, because it's not. A lot of times when you use graffiti as environmental storytelling, it's very on the nose. It's not subtle. This felt a lot more subtle. You know?
Yeah, and it's, you know, the graffiti, there's a lot of other environmental storytelling that it's there, and it's the type that, like, you didn't notice it in the first half of your playthrough, but it's there. And if you replayed the game, you would look around the first, 30 minutes and be like, holy shit, this was here the whole time. I just didn't know what I was looking for. And they set up that conflict with the US soldiers so well because, like, they have been cut off from communication for a long time. It's entirely plausible that all hell has broken loose and this group of soldiers has, like, abandoned their mission, and now they're in, like, survival mode, basically. And so the fact that they're attacking you, yeah, it's off that you're fighting against US soldiers. That's not what you do in these games. But it felt like it could be real. It could be the story. Like, you could be correct in what you think. And as you go on, that starts to get chipped away. And I wonder what the scene is that first gave you that idea that you're the villain here.
That moment for me, I want to say, was after the second time that white phosphorus rounds are used. When you use the white phosphorus rounds, is that what you were talking about too? That's
the one that on your first playthrough, maybe you had some inklings that you're not doing the right thing. Because there's a scene before this where you shoot out a glass ceiling and sand pours in and buries a bunch of civilians alive. And you're like, oh, that was not great. But kind of after that, you do get to that white phosphorus scene. And that feels like the scene that is like okay, we need to make sure everyone's on the same page here, that Walker is doing some evil shit. And that's the scene that gets that to you.
Well, because you see the effects of white phosphorus before you use it. So it's like...
Yes, exactly.
Even though in the game world, Walker would technically know what the effects of white phosphorus are, you, the player, do not. So it's really smart of them to have the enemy use or attempt to use white phosphorus against you, which ends up killing a bunch of civilians. And you see the effects of what white phosphorus, like, rounds do to people. It is this ugly, awful, melting flesh, screaming, agonizing. It's awful. Like, it's horrific.
It's banned by the Geneva Convention for a reason. It's terrible shit. And I think that this white phosphorus scene is beautiful for the story reason of making you realize that you are not the good guy. You're not the hero here. And I think it's great because of the way that it's shown to you. Because if you played the campaign in Call of Duty 4, or maybe it was Modern Warfare 2, I can't remember, but there is a scene where you're doing this overhead mortar camera, the black and white, and you see these little people running around on your screen, but they're so small, they look like insects. They're dehumanized, and you are just shooting them down. Mortar, 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 mortar. You kill like hundreds of people in that section in this this Call of Duty game. And this white phosphorus scene uses the exact same thing. Same camera, same gameplay interface, we'll say. And so when I did that, I remembered that Call of Duty section. And then I was like, oh, I've done this before. That was fun. So like, okay, we're picking these off. We're dropping these white phosphorus bombs on the enemy. And then when you see what happened, it was like, oh, fuck.
Well, I think so.
Fuck.
Because you see what happens with white, like I said, you see what happens with white phosphorus before. So it makes it that much. If you did not see the moment of the enemy using white phosphorus against you or attempting to use it against you, then when you end up using it on them, it wouldn't mean as much to, like, it wouldn't have as much of an impact because you don't have, because like you said, it's that you're playing it from a dehumanizing perspective where you have that aerial copter, you see the, you know, they're like you see the top down view, they look like ants. If that's all you saw, and yeah, if you walk through the aftermath, it would have been like just as traumatic, but I think it makes it's even more horrific because now you as the player know exactly what you're doing. You know exactly the aftermath of that, of what you are causing, and you are still going through with it because you think you have to, because you think that this is what is needed and what is necessary. Now,
you're doing this to the enemy.
Sorry, go ahead.
Whereas, and then in that Call of Duty game, you don't have to walk through the aftermath of what you did. Mm-hmm. The mission is over after that. But in this game, number one, you think you're doing it to the enemy, and then afterwards, you have to walk through it. The way to get to the exit of the level is to walk through it.
Now, before we get to the big twist at the end of this horrific moment, there is one thing I wanted to talk about because like we were talking about all these different choices that you can make. And there's a choice earlier on when you meet a CIA guy. You see a 33rd soldier and a CIA guy fighting. And you can choose to shoot the CIA guy or not. You try to question him and interrogate him. You can like that's something that I noticed. Like if you might have had a chance to like do something different there, but it kind of, what is brilliant about this game's narrative design is that it keeps confusing you to the point where like you don't know, like you think you're, like you said, you think you're making the right decisions, which makes this phosphorus scene a little bit more not palatable to witness, but palatable to make the decision because you've been so confused. The fog of war is so thick at this point that you're like, yeah, no, I have to do this. Like, this is just what's necessary. And
well,
sorry, go on.
This is actually like one of those parts where if you think about it, you might think you do have a choice, but you don't. You have to use the white phosphorus here.
No, not the white. I'm not talking about the white phosphorus. You don't have it. I know you don't have a choice with the white phosphorus.
Right.
I'm talking about the CIA agent earlier on. You have a choice whether to shoot him or not, I believe.
Right.
That's what I was talking about.
But just to bring it back to the white phosphorus scene, like that is a part where I wish it was one of those moments where I went into, was gung-ho about using the white phosphorus mortars, and it turned out that I had another choice. That would have been really effective, I think. But you can't. If you shoot the enemies, they'll just infinitely respawn. So you do have to do it. The thing that kind of saves it is that your character, Walker, he thinks it's the only choice. And I think it's Adams. It gives him a little bit of shit for it. Like, hey, like, we don't have to use this. And Walker's like, nope, we have to. This is the only choice. We have to do this. And one of them says something to the effect of like, there's always a choice in this. So And then after this is over, well, we can talk about what happens when you walk through the aftermath, and then then get into how they deal with it.
Specifically, I wanted to talk about the aftermath right here because I have never felt that in a game. So you walk through the aftermath, you see the horror that you've inflicted on these soldiers that you saw them inflict on some other people beforehand. And at first you're kind of like, holy shit, like this is like real, you're kind of, part of me was like, well, they did it to them, so it's like somewhat justified. It's still atrocious and awful, but like you can kind of like you justify it a little bit. But then when there's a soldier who's still alive, barely, you know, burned to hell and back, like in severe pain, and you go up to him and he just goes, why? And he goes like, because, you know, this is what you get, you son of a bitch, blah blah blah. Then he goes, what's the line? It's like, but we were trying to help. And Walker goes, help, and he looks to his left and he looks down an alley, and it's 40 some odd civilians that you have just roasted alive with these phosphorus shells. I shit you not, when I played that, when I got to this section and I saw that, because it took me so by surprise. Like a lot, you know, most games would have stopped at just like seeing the aftermath of the soldiers, but no, they go the step further and be like, you did this. I literally said, what did I do? It wasn't what did they do? I didn't put myself in, I wasn't disassociating from it. I was literally like, holy shit, what did I just do? And especially the moment where, you know, you kind of get it doesn't go into first person, but they kind of show it like you would see a scene from a movie where someone's kind of like tripping balls, or like having not tripping balls, but having like a mental break. And you can kind of see that with Walker here. And it zooms in on a mother holding her child, and she's just basically ash at this point. I almost cried on stream when that happened, because now that I'm a parent, all I could see was my own kid and family in that. And it was the most, I literally, like, that's going to stick with me forever. Like, and the fact that a game was able to elicit that emotion, like with such a, like that's fucking harsh. That what a ballsy decision to make the player feel that way in that, and do that in the story. It's just, it's insane.
Yeah. So what I like about this in this game in general, and they do this to you multiple times, and there's one later on in the story where I did something similar, but I actually did have a choice. I didn't have to do the terrible thing that I did, and I'll talk about that later. But what I like about this is that this is not a game where you play the entire game and then you get to the end and it's like, oh, surprise, you're the villain, you piece of shit. Why would you do that? In this game, you know very early on that you're doing bad things. If this white phosphorus scene is like that kind of that point where they're like, we need everyone on board that Walker is committing atrocities here. And you're right, that scene is super affecting. The first time I played it, I had that same reaction, like, what have I done, basically? And that was before I knew that there was actually no gameplay choice, that you do have to do this. But what I like about that, and what saves it for me, is that right after Walker sees what he did, he sees the burned mom and child, he immediately rationalizes it to himself, talking about how he had no choice. And Lugo and Adams are like, what the fuck, man? Like, we definitely had a choice. We didn't have to do that. And they get in a fight about it. And Walker yells at them and says, like, pull yourself together. You are, you know, special forces or whatever they are. Like, act like it. And then they move on. Walker is like rationalizing this to himself as he moves through these story points. And there's a definite theme, I think, in this game of Walker goes through these story points, and at every stop he does what he thinks that he should do.
Yes.
And he is consistently doing the wrong thing and just consistently rationalizing what he did to himself after the fact, making it okay. And like we all do this to some extent. Like, we're not dropping, chemical weapons on people and rationalizing it to ourselves.
Yeah.
But the first instinct for people when you make a mistake a lot of times is to not blame yourself, but to say, oh no, I had to do that. It's not my fault.
Mm-hmm.
I catch myself doing it. And so like Walker doing it here is a very understandable thing. Like, instead of living with the fact that you just committed war crimes, you're going to tell yourself that you had no choice, that you had to do that in order to succeed in your mission.
And it was all Conrad's fault, all Colonel Conrad, because his soldiers are out here. That's why we had to. They forced us into this situation. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to do it. And like I always like, I like that. At least in this though, the way the game presents the narrative is that it does make the player feel like you did have no other choice. Like that, like from a gameplay perspective, like what, there's 1,000 guys here. There's no way I could do this. Versus if I use these bombs, yeah, it's horrific, but they used it first. So you kind of justify it to yourself a little bit. And then it's just more efficient, and then you move on, and it's what it is. But no, they don't.
That's video games.
Yeah, that's video games. But they don't let you get away with that. They don't let you just rest on They don't let you rest on that justification, because there is. It leaves you with there was no justification for it. Now, it is good design that even though it is forced upon you, like you can't. There's no choice here. You have to use the white phosphorus for the narrative. The game does a good job masking that, and I hate it. I fucking hate it when movies or other media try to be deep and talk about the illusion of choice, or the, like, oh, you were, there's always a choice, just because you think you're forced into something. This game, it actually was like that, like you have this, you feel like there's no other choice, but there actually was, type of thing. Versus, I'm thinking, I know this movie series isn't the paragon of excellent writing, but the Fast and Furious movies, in one of the movies, I'm not going to say which one just in case people don't want it spoiled, Vin Diesel is forced to become a bad guy because you find out the villain is holding someone he cares very deeply for captive, and says that they will kill this person. And I'm being very vague on purpose, but to me, in the whole movie, the villain, played by Charlize Theron, is like, you always have a choice. You don't have to do this. You just want to do this. Like you trying to play with that idea of just like you're a fucked up person. And I'm like, this is fucking stupid. Like, I love the movies, and this doesn't kill the movie for me, because these movies aren't known for narrative. So it's not something I'm going to die on the hill, but I hate it when it is a pet peeve though, where it seems like the movie's trying to make some sort of a statement, where it's like talking about the illusion of choice. Like, you always have a choice, like, just, you don't think you have a choice, but you always have choice. Or like, it's some type of statement on reality, and like what you can do and what you choose and choose not to do. When it's like in Fast and Furious, it's like, no, he didn't have a fucking choice. You're holding someone he cares super deeply for, like insanely deeply for, captive. Like, what's his other option? Just let you kill that person? Like, that's not an option. Versus in this game, it's either fight 1,000 enemies and kill them all with bullets, or do it quickly and painfully, or do it in, like, it's which way? Kill them this way or kill them that way? Like, that's how the game makes you feel like you have to do it, because you can't sneak through it.
And if you have a history of playing military shooters or video games in general, using that mortar firing interface is more fun than
it is
shooting a bunch of enemies individually using your cover fire mechanics and stuff like that. So you're going to pick the thing that's more fun, that's more efficient, and it turns out that was a giant mistake. So that scene actually doesn't give you a choice. You have to do that. But there are some scenes later where you feel like you don't have a choice, or you know you have a choice, but it's not the choice that you actually have, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think that, so like this white phosphorus scene is shocking. It's emotionally affecting, but I don't think it's the best example of you feeling like there's no choice when there is, because those examples come later. And other examples you got me thinking about, like BioShock, which is another famous illusion of free will type of game, right? But in that game, you don't have a choice. You can't progress the game without doing what they want you to do. So, like, I dig the reveal in BioShock. It's really great, and I won't spoil it for people who haven't played BioShock. But in this game, there are sections where you do actually have decisions to make. And like the next decision is the one with the two men hanging from the bridge, if you remember that.
Yes. And real quick to talk about BioShock and compare it to this. BioShock, it really, I kept saying the phrase illusion of choice. It wasn't really applicable to this game, because this game is all about you always have a choice. Like there is something that you can do that's, I shouldn't say always, but you do have a choice in more often than you think type of thing. Versus in BioShock, to give them credit, they, in both the original and in Infinite, they give a narrative reason why choice is an illusion. And whether you like that narrative reason, that's a different story. I think most people like the first BioShock's narrative reason, and they don't like the Infinite's narrative reason. I like both equally, but I like in the original more. But in any case, in this, it seems like they're both examining the idea of choice in different ways. BioShock is very much choice is an illusion, and here's why. And let me use video games and what you're used to as video game mechanics to explain why. And in this game, it's saying you do have a choice, you just don't realize it because you've played too many video games. It's a really interesting look at choice from two different perspectives and using gameplay. Actually, not. The gameplay is very different, but it's still a shooter. They're using shooter mechanics to explore two different mindsets of choice, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, this game is using that kind of like a lot of sections where like you jump at the first thing that you think is right because you played video games before and you think you know how video games work, but the narrative for the decision making that Walker is making also works on that front. In how Walker always thinks he's making the right decision, trying to be the hero, trying to accomplish his mission of finding Conrad, and nothing else matters except for the mission. And therefore, every decision you make, every horrible thing you do is okay as long as it furthers that mission. So like you have it both on like the player side of things with how I think I know video games work and my decision making as it relates to playing video games, but also Walker and how he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I really love how this game examines that. And the fact that, to bring it back to the white phosphorus scene, the fact that we both said when that scene happened, it wasn't just like, holy shit, what happened? It was, holy shit, what did I do? You felt more responsible for your decision making, because the narrative and the gameplay and narrative combined is so well designed. Now, to get to a little bit further ahead in the story, the two hanging men. Is this what you were talking about? It's like one of the first things.
This is the one where you have a choice. The game tells you have a choice, but the choice that you actually have is not the one that the game tells you.
Yep, and I'm curious about what would happen if I replayed it. Because I didn't get a chance to replay it. You suggested playing it a second time once you know the plot twist at the very end of the game, which we will get to, of course. But so I didn't know that the third choice. We'll get back. Let's not tell what this choice is. We will kind of retcon it as kind of the way the game does at the very end of the episode when we get to the big twist at the end. But
okay.
Well, actually, I guess it doesn't matter, because if this is a spoiler wall, people should fucking know. Like, whether. So yeah, never mind. Let's just go with it. So the Conrad, you're told to either kill one of two people, and they both have reasons for it. And it turns out you don't really need to do either. I guess, because this is the first instance of the flashback, I guess we should just talk about the big twist at the end. I feel like that's the only way you can go through the rest of the game and like look at all the different options, right?
Sure. So regarding the big twist at the end, I want to take it back to the opening scene of the game. where you don't open with your team walking through the sand into the city. You open with this helicopter combat. That's the first scene of the game is this, you're in a helicopter, you're shooting a machine gun at other helicopters, and yada, 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 the helicopter crashes, it fades to white, and then you wake up at the beginning of the mission. And I don't know if you noticed this, but there's a difference. Sometimes your scenes fade to white, and sometimes they fade to black. And there's a significance to that.
I did not notice that, actually.
I didn't notice my first time either, because why would I? But what happens is when it fades to white, and this has been confirmed by the developer, when it fades to white, it means that what happened did not actually happen.
Oh.
And we can talk about what that means. But when it fades to black, it means that actually did happen. Those are real events.
So the helicopter... So wait, when it faded to white in the beginning, does that mean the helicopter part was not a real event, or the desert scene was not a real event?
What I took that to mean, because I'm not sure.
I would assume it would mean the preceding scene, because otherwise, what's the point of... So like in this example, like if the helicopter part was real and the crash did happen, where did your character start? It would make more sense that your character just shows up in the desert, not from the helicopter crash, just they show up.
Right. So I think some of those early scenes fade to black, which means that they did actually go into Dubai. They went on their mission. They did find a distress call and stuff like that. And then they start fading to white, and you get to a point like halfway through the game where it's all fade to whites from then to the end of the game, including the helicopter crash, which comes back around. It's nonlinear storytelling. So like the story doesn't start with the helicopter crash. That happens like 3/4 of the way through the game. So there's a couple of theories, and you could think that fading to white, it meaning it's not real, means it never happened and this is imagination, or that these are distorted retellings or relivings of things that did actually happen. And there's a lot of shit in this game that is like, it's weird. And then when you start to think of it through the lens of Walker reliving these events in his head, or his life flashing before his eyes as he dies, or something like that, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know if you notice, you're always going down in this game. You're constantly going down a skyscraper and coming out at the top of another skyscraper. And then you go down. Yeah. You're always rappelling down, falling down. And then you walk horizontally, and then you go down another skyscraper. So the imagery there. The whole thing with the radio man, like, it was interesting when it first started, but you start to get the feeling like, hey, why is this DJ mocking me and playing music during my gunfights? That doesn't make any sense. Like, that's not a real thing that would happen. So these are all things that support like either this not actually happening or being a distorted retelling. And so when you get to the end and how everything is so weird at the end of the game, it makes sense, because this Walker didn't meet Conrad at the end of the game. No. And these two dudes hanging from the bridge were not alive during that scene. You see at the end, they were long dead. The reality of it is that they're just two dead bodies hanging from a bridge. And Walker is imagining the radio man telling him the story of these two men, and you choose the one to punish. That never happened that way. It's just happening. So
I always thought the radio man was real, but because radio man wasn't always, like, he was talking to Conrad in that, what he thought was Conrad in that the two dead man hanging scene. He wasn't talking to the radio man. So, because the guy who kills radio man isn't you, it's Lugo. It isn't Walker.
Right. Lugo kills him.
Lugo kills him. So real quick, before we continue on with this, I just wanted to say, like, when you talk about the intro and how the fade to white with the helicopters, then you start out in the beginning of the desert. That's fucking genius, because I remember, like, because when you're playing it, you're thinking like, okay, you're in a helicopter, you're going in, you crash, and so here you are, like, after the crash, and you and your soldier buddy survive, and you move on. but it makes sense now why it's kind of like a flash forward, and it's told non-linearly. And because I remember when you get to that helicopter mission again, I'm like, didn't I already do this? This seems really familiar. Why is it doing this again? And now it makes a whole lot more fucking sense, where from the get-go, the game's trying to confuse you, and it just continues to confuse you. But the reason I was saying, and to lend itself to the confusion, after the white phosphorus scene, that's where kind of like the confusion kicks into high gear. And I guess to explain why this is, I mean, for people who've played this, I guess hopefully they're listening. I would assuming they're already listening now. We've put up the spoiler wall, so the big twist at the very end is that you, Walker, are going on this major PTSD trauma trip. You are hallucinating a lot. And that's why the importance of the fading to white and fading to black, which I did not notice, but it makes a lot of sense narratively. That's why it's so important that you fade to white and fade to black, because it's showing you which scenes have a fabricated or an altered version of reality in them. Because when you find out the twist and you see what really happened, you see Walker just shooting 2 dead bodies, and Lugo and oh my gosh, I blanked on the other dude's name. I'm so sorry.
Adams.
Lugo and Adams just looking at him like, what the fuck? Like, why did he shoot that dead body? Who's he talking to? And it makes a lot more sense why they seem more concerned for him as the game goes on, but they don't know what else to do because they're already so confused.
Right.
I always felt like they weren't going through a PTSD trip. It was because they weren't necessarily trying to 100% justify their actions. It was you, Martin. It was you, Walker, who was like, no, it's, Conrad. He made us do this. And they always seem kind of skeptical about it throughout the game, and you're always wondering why. And now you realize that he's not talking to anyone. He's not talking to Conrad. Conrad, you find out, is dead. He's been dead since the game started, and you just had no idea. And it really kind of fucks with you, and it makes you really think about all the decisions you made, especially after that phosphorus scene. It makes you think about all the decisions you made and think about, like, what could I have done differently?
Especially once you know some of the things in some of the choices that you make in the game, like some situations where you thought you were doing the only thing you could, but there was actually a choice. And so, like, there's a couple of, like, ideas that I haven't really settled on one. There's the idea that the team went into Dubai, they found the distress call, they started following it, they did some terrible shit, and they're really mentally suffering from the effects of what they've seen and what they've done. And so reality becomes distorted for them. And so the things that you start seeing are what they are experiencing, even if it's not the way things are really happening. Or the idea that they died during some point in the mission, maybe that helicopter crash. It would be a realistic point in the story for everybody to die, right? There was a horrible helicopter crash. And so this is kind of these events being replayed in Walker's mind, the way that he thinks they happened. And then the things that happen after the helicopter crash didn't actually happen. They're fabrications, in a way. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at it, and I don't think it particularly matters which one you pick, just that you realize that all that stuff that happened toward the end of the game, or from the midpoint on even, did not happen that way. There's not actually a radio man taunting them the whole time. There's not there's not this amazing helicopter fight that they walk uninjured away from. There's not this meeting with Conrad at the end, and they show you that at the end, that's not how it happened. And it's really cool how it is a gradual move with the things that are happening in the story, the visual design, all of that. It really supports this idea that you have totally lost it. And it's in the last hour of the game, it's like on Front Street, like, this is hell. This is not how things are happening.
And like your character visually looks like hell. And I know it makes sense, but
Yeah,
by the end of the game, it looks like, I swear to God, you can see like bits of his skull. Like it's like his skin has been like burned away in some
it's been
moments.
like burned off. Yeah.
It's pretty fucked up. Now it's interesting that you think I think the Radio Man is real. I didn't think he was part of the PTSD trip. I assumed
I don't doubt that there is a DJ. I don't doubt that there is a DJ, but the fact that the Radio Man is taunting them and like providing a soundtrack to their firefights, like that's not real.
Yes, okay, that makes a lot more sense. I totally understand that. I think I kind of agree with you with that. That in the whole game, I mean, from the get-go, then it really just deals with when you are in this. The developers talked about this in pretty much every interview that I saw. What happens to good men when they're put in awful, like unwinnable situations? And that's
right.
A lot of games and media in general, I feel like, try to focus on this. They try to, even in The Dark Knight, they talk about like, you'll see what these good people do when they're the Joker's whole speech about that in The Dark Knight. There's a lot of movies that do that, but it comes off as pretentious. It comes off as like, we're going to show you the darkness of the human heart. And oh man, we almost slipped into some Kingdom Hearts shit right there. Where's Eric when we need him?
Yeah.
But it's, a lot of things will try to focus on that, but it comes off as super pretentious. And it doesn't come off as pretentious because it's never this narrative is never trying to put you in a situation where it's like obvious that they're trying to make you make a shitty choice. They put you in the game because it's a military shooter. Anything in wars, people know war is hell, so anything in war is automatically going to be a shitty situation. So you have good people getting thrown into war. That's good people in a shitty situation. And then you take that shitty situation and you pile more layers of shit on top of it, and you kind of see what happens to a human being when they're forced to deal with stuff like this. And in this, it just doesn't ever feel like it's trying to. I think the issue I have with other media that does stuff like this is that it almost feels like, look how evil humans actually are. And in this game, it doesn't do that. It doesn't show, look how evil humans actually are. It more or less shows this. It's not like you're making evil and bad choices, but it never feels like it's intentional by you or the character. It feels like, well, this is the situation I was in. This is the choice I'm making because of the situation I'm in. It's not like it would be different if like you see 1,000 you see like 100 like if we go back to the white phosphorus scene, it would be different if you look at that situation and you see 50 civilians and 100 soldiers, and then you still decide to use that. Then that's very much like, look how evil humans are. If we're, this is the darkness of the human heart. But they didn't do that. They went like, this is what we thought we had to do in this moment, and so we did it. And it turns out we just went worse and worse and worse and worse, and it just continues to get worse. And it's really masterfully written because it just, as we've said before, it hides all of that. It hides the intentions of what it's trying to relay, and it hides those intentions, and those intentions don't come off as pretentious once you understand what they are. It's so fucking good.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to assume anybody's real life combat experience because I've never served in the military.
Same.
I've never been in a conflict like that. I've never had to make these choices. But I did hear, I heard my grandpa talk about his combat experience in World War II. Not dropping white phosphorus on people, but, he was involved in people's deaths. And the way that he talked about it was that it was like the worst experience of his life by far, and that he had to. Otherwise, he would have died.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then just take that example, but also like war media is full of these situations where people rationalize the things that they do because it was the thing they had to do. And the way that you rationalize that, or if you can, is up to you. But in this game, Walker pretty easily rationalizes it to himself as being like, these are the things I had to do to accomplish my mission and to stay alive and protect my team. Later on, there's that scene where Lugo gets captured by the civilians.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one of those choice scenes that doesn't seem like it's a choice. And this is a scene where one of your partners is in danger and you need to make a choice to save them. And it needs to be a fast choice because those civilians are closing in and your character, you'll die if they get too close to you. So what did you do in that situation? Because this is the one that really worked on me.
If I remember correctly, in that situation, because I'm brain farting a little bit. I don't think I made it to him in time because I didn't have the heart to shoot at any civilians.
Right.
So I don't think I made it in time. I'm pretty sure he died. It was Lugo, right? That's who you said?
It's Lugo. Lugo's the one who dies because you can't save him. He'll always die.
Yeah.
But you get to them and you get Lugo down, but then there's this crowd of civilians closing in on you. They're throwing rocks and stuff. And like I said, you're pitted against the crowd and you will lose. You'll get a game over if they get to you. So you have to do something. And I thought I have to shoot at this crowd to get them to disperse. And so I did. And it was not a decision that I thought too hard about. It felt like the thing I had to do. Turns out though, you don't have to do that. You can just shoot your gun anywhere and they'll get scared and run away.
That's what I did. I just shot it anywhere and they get scared and run away.
So that choice really worked on me because I felt what the character would feel. I felt like there was no choice. And I did what I thought was the only thing.
Yeah,
and it turns out that was not the only thing. And this game has so many decisions like that. Whether you, the player, participate in that decision making or not, this game is full of decisions like that. And it's part of the reason it's so good.
Now, do you know, and speaking of choices that you may or may not be able to make, the water, the blowing up the water tanker, is that something that,
right.
Is that a choice or is that something I understand you're probably going to have to go on that mission regardless, but is there a way to not blow up the water and completely dehydrate and kill the city through thirst?
No, you have to. And I think it's good that you don't have a choice there because it shows you that Walker is on board for literally dooming an entire city to die of thirst. He's on board as long as it will help him get to Conrad. He does not care. And it's not lost on me too that gameplay section where you're riding on the side of the truck shooting a grenade launcher at people that are literally trying to save the city by stopping you, and you're just shooting grenades. It's really fun. Really fun section of the game. It is. And it's not lost on me that's one of the most fun sections of the game. The only choice you have is during that section, you get to choose whether to mercy kill Riggs or let him burn in the truck crash.
I think I mercy killed him just because I didn't I guess the other big factor in this is that the CIA is trying to cover up everything that happened in this city, which is also a very it's such an interesting thing that this game really seems to focus on. It's not necessarily anti-military. Let me put it this way: it's not anti-soldier, but it almost seems like not even anti-military. It's glorification of the military.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's done it's done in a tactful way. If it doesn't come off, I think that's the biggest thing that I can say about the narrative. It doesn't come off as pretentious, and that's very fucking hard to do when you're coming off with when you're telling a story like this, when you're telling a story that deals with so many moral quandaries. It is so easy to come off as well, here's the moral high ground that you need to take. And it doesn't do that. It doesn't present itself. It doesn't even present its own narrative as this is the right choice. And I think that's what's so good about it. Because I was always confused by this, but I think one of the other big themes it does is because the game makes you so confused, like you said, the dealing with choice and dealing with all the different things that you feel you're forced to do. it makes you question reality a lot. And we touched on it already with the fade to whites and fade to blacks and all that other stuff. But I think one of the other reason it makes you question reality is that it kind of deals with fog of war a lot, where I'm still confused by the whole thing. I thought until we started having this conversation that there was the 33rd, obviously Conrad's unit, and then there was a defector, or there was a defector unit. There was like a rebel unit of the 33rd. And then there was also civilians who were working with that rebel unit. But now I guess it's not. It's the 33rd, the CIA, who has tried to create a rebel faction to like help stop the city, or help stop what's left of it. I don't know. I'm confused by the players involved at this.
Yeah, that part of the plot is not something that I picked up on super well, just because the way that I consume stories, once we start bringing in a bunch of different players, I start to get lost. And then I'm so focused on like the personal story with Walker and crew that I didn't really pick up on that. But you are right. There is like a rogue CIA agent who decides we're going to steal all the water in the city. We're going to basically kill everybody to cover up what the CIA and what Conrad's unit have done in the city, atrocities that they committed, basically, so that, the world is not going to hear about this and cause a world war to break out or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's what I got out of that. But the main thing is that if you look back on a lot of the sections early in the game with the knowledge that you have later in the game, a lot of those sections where you're fighting what you thought were rogue US soldiers because you thought they were going to kill civilians, they weren't. They were trying to get civilians to safety away from you. Oh. And you, like, there's that scene again where you shoot out the ceiling of a skyscraper and a bunch of sand comes in and smothers everybody. Those soldiers were trying to protect those civilians. They were not trying to kill them. They were trying to get them out of there. And you killed everybody. Same thing with that white phosphorus scene.
See, I didn't even notice the civilians in that sand scene. I didn't even see anybody there except soldiers.
It's because you're fighting the soldiers, but the civilians are down below. You can see and hear the soldiers like shepherding them along.
Okay.
So it's only with like the clarity that you get later, if you start to look back on things that happen really early in the game, that you realize that you've been evil most of this game, basically.
I'm very confused then why the CIA was trying to cover everything up if all of Conrad's soldiers seemed to be trying to help the civilians. I guess there were some like atrocities committed by them, or were there two factions of American soldiers minus the CIA? Take the CIA out. Did the 33rd split? That's what I'm confused by.
I'm not totally clear on that. So
okay,
can't say for sure.
But I think we should move on to talking about the finale of this game. The final moment, because we are running long on time. Now there's probably going to be at least 10 minutes edited out because a little behind the scenes, listeners. I was stumbling and bumbling a whole bunch of times throughout this episode, so there's going to be some fun edits for me on this one. So we should move to the final section of this game, and this is what I like about this is that shooters have a hard time with bosses and like final sections, and it's either very few shooters do bosses well. It's either a bullet sponge with very little mechanics, or it's wave after wave of like a bunch of different types of enemies, and that's what this game does. It like the final section isn't that interesting, but what it lacks in difficulty, it makes up for with its narrative punch. In fact, I would argue the last shooter that I played that had like a really unique boss mechanic was Uncharted 2. Like, I'm sure
I hate the bosses in Uncharted so much. I think they're awful.
Uncharted 2, the final boss, is the only one I think that's actually interesting out of the entire series, because it's not just a quick time event. It's this it gives a storyline. I mean, I shouldn't go into it. I love the final boss in Uncharted 2. I'm sure there's some other shooters that I played. Like I loved Doom and Wolfenstein and the remakes of those. I don't remember the final bosses all that well. Doesn't mean that they weren't unique or inventive, but I from what I remember, but I don't remember that. I remember the Uncharted 2 final boss, and in this, I don't remember what the final wave was, but I do remember the final narrative punch, which you get all the way up to the tower, and I don't know if this is a hallucination or not, part of your PTSD hallucination, where they say, you know, a bunch of soldiers salute you and say, the 33rd is now yours. That might be real, that might not, I don't know.
So what happens, like the boss fight is Adam sacrifices himself to allow you to get closer to the door. Like Walker is ready to surrender because you have this insane fight.
Yes,
it's tough.
It's a very tough
to
fight.
Fight your way up to this tower. And Walker starts to get like this idea that he's going to surrender. And Adams is like, you're not surrendering. We put up with all of your shit up until this point. And he jumps off and sacrifices himself, draws fire so Walker can get closer. And the final boss is one of those armored enemies that you fight throughout the game, but this one is one of your teammates. You're hallucinating that it's one of your teammates. I forget if it's Adams or Lugo, but you kill them, you get inside the building, and what makes me like almost guarantee that this is not real is that you have this insane firefight outside of the tower, and the minute you step in the door, everyone's like, welcome, Mr. Walker.
Yeah,
the 33rd is yours.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That would make more sense. That it can't be real. So that you say they, you know, you walk up to the top of this like penthouse or whatever it is, and you think you're finally going to meet Conrad, the man who has quote unquote forced you to do all of these horrific things. And turns out you get up there, the man's dead. He's been dead the entire time. And you, ever since the white phosphorus attack, to rationalize your horrific decisions leading up and including that, Walker is just not there. He's basically hallucinating. He's not fully with it mentally. And it kind of leads to the idea of like this whole thing was like you start seeing what all the different other possibilities you could have gone with, because you didn't realize that most of this was just a PTSD trip.
Well, you could view it that way. You could also view it that Walker dies in that helicopter crash, and that this is his own personal hell that he's in. So everything that happens after, including both of his squad mates dying, is in his own personal version of hell. So you could view it as him hallucinating throughout the game after some event that kind of broke him, basically, which is totally cool. All of these reads track with me. It's really interesting what happens here. You don't go up the building and he's dead right away. You have a long conversation with him of what you think is him. He's dead in real life. But you talk to him for a while. You walk up, he's painting, and he's painting a portrait of the aftermath of the white phosphorus scene. He's painting that mother and child. He talks to you. He kind of, he has a couple of quotes here that I think were like really on like the theme of the game. So there's a quote he says where he says, if the truth is undeniable, you create your own, that's what Walker's been doing the entire game. He's been kind of remaking the truth as it fits what he's doing. And there's a couple others. There's one, he says, you're here. This is Conrad talking to Walker. You're here because you wanted to be something you're not, a hero. And again, like Walker making all these decisions because it's the heroic or thing that he thinks is right, but it's not. And then the final quote where he says, this is a line men like us have to cross. If we're lucky, we do what's necessary and then we die. And that is that would track with the PTSD read of this. And not saying that anyone who's been in combat would be lucky to die instead of returning home affected by it. But that's a quote that kind of fits with what's going on in the game, I think. And did you notice the loading screens as you were playing?
Don't they normally give like tips and stuff like that? And it changes as it goes along.
They do give you tips and they do change. And by the end of the game, there are super meta things that they're telling you. There's one loading screen that says something to the effect of like, it says something like killing for your government is correct. Killing civilians is not okay. Killing for entertainment is fun, or something like that. Late in the game, you know, a meta video game reference.
Yeah.
There's another one that says like, the United States government does not condone the killing of unarmed civilians, but this isn't real, so who cares? It's a loading screen thing that happens pretty late in the game. So if you want to read that as, this isn't real because you, Dave, Josh, you're playing a video game. Video games aren't real life. Or Walker is experiencing something that's not real.
There's so many layers. I really feel like you could have like a 5-hour. How long was the Watch Out for Fireball series on this? Because don't they do it like kind of like a book club style thing where there's a few episodes?
I think it was. I think this was one episode about like 3 hours or so.
Yeah, I could see that. I'll have to listen to their episode on this as well. And it's interesting though, because I almost wonder if the different quotes that you just said, that Conrad said, I wonder if they all kind of relate to the different interpretations of what happens in the story, or also the different outcomes. Because at the very end, when you see Conrad's body, it kind of goes into like this weird parallel world for a moment, like it's in Walker's mind, and it's like I forget exactly visually what it's like, but it's like he can either choose to shoot himself or shoot Conrad, and it's basically choosing to accept his own reality, or choosing to accept quote unquote reality, or what the reality was that he created. Like if he shoots himself, then he has chosen to accept the consequences of his own actions. But if he shoots Conrad, then he's like, no, I'm sticking to my fantasy. Like, you're the reason for this. That's what they say, but obviously there's more interpretations.
Right. So there are 4 endings for the game.
Yep.
So you're right. You have that final confrontation at the end where Conrad points a gun at you and you have a choice. You can shoot Conrad or you can let Conrad shoot you. Or I guess if you shoot and miss or whatever. Yeah. So if Conrad shoots you, then it's revealed that Walker shot himself. That Conrad's not real. So that's what actually happened. If you shoot Conrad... what did you do before we go deeper? Did you shoot Conrad?
I shot myself. Like I shot the reflection of myself or whatever.
Okay, so you can do that, and then, or you can just, I guess you can shoot the reflection, or you can just do nothing, and Conrad will shoot you.
Yeah,
and it's revealed that Walker kills himself. So, my first time I played, I shot Conrad, and so Walker calls for rescue, and the army arrives to pick him up, and you have another choice. They tell you to put your gun down, and you can either fight them, you can kill all of them, or you can put your gun down. So if you put your gun down, actually there's 3 ways to do it. So if you put your gun down, you get in the car and you're driving away with them, and one of the soldiers asks Walker, how did you survive? And Walker says, who says I did? And so it's that double meaning. It could be PTSD, you know. Mm-hmm. He's going home, but he'll never be the same. Or that he actually did die, and this is happening in his head or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's that. If you choose to fight the rescue party, if you die in the fight, that's an ending. And Walker will lay and die, and he'll just... this is where that quote is. He'll recall a conversation between him and Conrad during a previous conflict. That's where that quote by Conrad is, where he says, Walker talks about like what it's going to be like to go home, and Conrad kind of like criticizes him and says, hey, people like us, we have a line to cross. If we're lucky, we cross the line, do what's necessary, and then we die. kind of that same line, like there's no return to normal life after this. And again, cannot stress enough that I'm not going to assume anyone's experience with combat or PTSD. I don't have any experience with that. But just reading into what's in the text here, the last ending is, because I've seen all of them now, I reloaded my save to do all this stuff. If you kill the entire rescue party, Walker takes their radio and sends out a message that says, "Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai," which was the first line of the game.
And the tagline for this episode, after me deliberating on it for like fucking 20 minutes trying to figure out what should be the tagline for the episode, there's just so many different ways you can look at the pause, like, because the fact that what's cool about this is that, you know, in almost any game there's like a developer approved ending. It's like there's an ending and this is the one that the developer wanted to do for the narrative, but you can choose whatever you want. In this, all four are equally plausible. Like, it's whatever it. I'm normally the type of person that hates when a narrative doesn't end on a definitive note, but I think it genuinely works for this game, where it doesn't end on a definitive note, because not only because of the four different endings, but because the four different endings can each be interpreted in a multitude of ways. And
yeah,
normally I hate shit like that, like, because it either can feel like a cop-out, like that they didn't earn, or it could just be maybe I want a definitive resolution to the narrative that they crafted. And so this, though, I think it works. It really, really works. And this game, I think, to kind of start wrapping up our conversation on this, I think what makes this game so interesting is the fact that the endings tie into the whole theme of this fog of war, of not knowing what's real, not knowing what the right thing to do is. And each ending is just so indicative of all of that confusion that is inflicted upon you throughout your experience of playing the game.
Yeah, like when you were saying that you don't get a definitive ending here, it fits, because you don't get a definitive story in this.
Yeah.
So much of the story is what you think is happening, and what you think is real, and what you think is hallucinated, or did Walker die? Okay, if he died, when did he die? So much of that is not explicitly told to you. So the fact that you do get these four different endings that are all up for interpretation in some way fits with the rest of the story. And I do like how you have four different endings. They're all bad. There's no happy ending in this game. So I agree. I think that no matter which of these endings is your personal canon ending for maybe how your one playthrough went, or the ending that you like the most and best fits the themes, I do think that all four of them succeed to some degree in that way.
And once again, that's just impressive that the narrative is that strong, that it can support that many interpretations, that many endings, that much analysis of it, that it can support everything that we've talked about for the last, I mean, at the time clock I'm at is 2 hours, but like I said, there's going to be a lot of editing to do. But it really is truly impressive what this game does. So I do want to start wrapping this up officially. Is there any final things you want to talk about for the story, game, any of the above? Let's kind of give some final thoughts on this. What do you got, Dave? What are your final word? What's the final word? What's your final thoughts on this game?
Yeah, if it's not abundantly clear, I think that this is just like a masterclass in not only telling a story, but using the medium of video games to tell a story 100%. In a way that, like, if this were a movie, I think that you could tell this story in an interesting way in a movie, but it would not be as effective as using a video game. And the fact that I am participating in the decisions, I'm pressing the buttons, all of that. And I think that of all the games that I've played that do something like this, to use your actions as a player of video games to make a point, I think this one does it the best. There are other games that I think do a pretty good job of it, but I think that this is the winner. No game has done this in this way to such effect. And there are games that kind of do variations on this, but this is the one where it really got me. Like I talked about with that scene where Lugo dies, where I made the decision to shoot the crowd of civilians because I thought that was the only thing I could do.
Yep.
And there was a choice, and not everyone made the same choice that I did, but I feel like the game tapped into the psychology of someone playing video games, and it does that throughout the game to great effect. So I really I don't have enough kind words to say about this game. I think it's incredible. And we didn't talk about the music, but at the very end, just a very quick shout out to the music in the game, especially the licensed music from Deep Purple, the Star Spangled Banner on the main menu that gets more and more
like
decrepit as the game goes along.
Yeah.
So this is the total package. That's what I'll say.
For myself, it's actually kind of funny that this game ended up getting chosen because I'm going to be covering another game later this month, assuming that the recording session does happen. I have to actually reach out to the individual who wanted to come on the show to talk about it. But it's another game that deals with this type of idea of like kind of analyzing game players' choices and decision making throughout the game and trying to use it against them in some way, shape, or form. As a little bit,
can you tell me what?
I'll tell you off mic. Because
okay.
if I say it, then people are going to know, and I don't, since I haven't done an episode on it. Yeah, since I haven't recorded that episode yet, I want to kind of save my thoughts, but as a little teaser,
sure.
I think this game does it significantly better than that one, and that's going to be a hot take once people find out what the game is. So, I loved playing this game. I was so pleasantly surprised by it. Not pleasantly, I guess, would be a weird word for how horrific this game is and for what the thematic material is. It really is impressive what it does with narrative. The gameplay, like we said at the very beginning, is really good. I think it's better than what the critics say it is. Say it is or was. But what really sets this game apart is its narrative design. And I've said it a bunch of times before, the way it confuses you, the fog of war, it's just excellently crafted. And it is the only game I've ever played where after something big happened, I said, what did I do? It made me feel like a part of the narrative, and that does not happen often with me. So I cannot give this game enough glowing praise. So let's wrap up this episode of Still Loading. This was a heavier episode, but this game is it's a heavy topic. Like it's dealing with war and PTSD and just so many different heavy themes. But I really enjoyed having you on this episode, Dave. Thank you so much for setting aside a little over 2 hours now to chat about this game. I was even thinking, because your episode on this is like 2.5 hours long, I'm like, I'm not going to go that close to Dave's. But we're at 2 hours and 5 now. And obviously, as like I said, I'm going to probably edit out a good chunk. But even so, I'm amazed I got that close to it, even with going in with the intention to not get close to 2.5 hours. But goddamn it, here we are. So let's do our plugs now. I know you did it at the beginning. Let's just kind of let's do a reminder for everyone because at this point it's been an hour and a half ago. So what are your plugs? Where can people find you online? And what would you like to promote?
Yeah. So again, you can find my podcast on the same place you're listening to this podcast. Search Tales from the Backlog, and there's you'll find me there. Find a game, like I said, either find one that you played and you want to hear people talk about, or find a game that you have not played and you want to hear why it's special or maybe why it's not without being spoiled, because that's the point of the show being structured the way it is. So Tales from the Backlog. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. If you just search Tales from the Backlog, you'll find it. Same podcast art, all that stuff. So yeah, this has been awesome, man. Like, you're expressing some surprise that it went as long as it did, but I have, if you couldn't tell, I have so much to say about this game. I've now recorded 2 whole podcasts about it. I don't feel like I've exhausted my things to say about Spec Ops: The Line. It's wonderful. And this opportunity to come on here has been great. To come on Still Loading like twice in a month or 2 months, whatever it's been, What an honor.
Well, by the time this comes out, this will be out in April. So your previous appearance was actually back in January, right?
Yeah, time doesn't mean anything. So,
and we recorded that episode in December, which is just nuts to think about. No, I'm so grateful to have you on again, man. Second time in a year. It's been fun for me this year so far. I've had first time guests on the show, and then they've already come back onto the podcast. Bill, at the time we're recording this, the Pokemon episode is the most recent one.
Right, yeah.
And Bill was in Final Fantasy VIII. Bill Barber from the Gaming Collecting podcast was on Final Fantasy VIII, and then also was in my Pokemon episode. So it's been been a year of new guests that repeat very quickly. So I'm happy to have you back on the show. For myself, as usual, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to support the show, please give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I like feeling warm and fuzzy. I like seeing those kind words. Or if you hate the show, 5 stars. As long as it's 5 stars, it's fucking fine, you know. If you want to support the show monetarily and throw a couple of your hard-earned dollars my way, you can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you'll get the episodes a few days early at a higher bitrate. You'll get access to Patreon voting rights where you'll help choose topics like today's episode and other great games. So basically, quarterly, I'm going to throw out a poll of games I want to play, and this game was on it last time, so you can help determine another episode of the show if you become a patron. And also you get access to the Discord is open to everyone, but you'll get some patron exclusive roles and exclusive channels over there. For $4 a month, you'll get everything at the $1 level, plus 2 mini bonus episodes a month. And then for $5 a month, you'll get everything at the previous 2 levels, plus access to Still Bonding, which is a bonus podcast exclusive to the $5 level where 2 friends bond over 007. Me and my friend Erica are going through every James Bond movie, and it has been something, let me tell you. I'm having a fucking blast with it. I love the Bond movies. So it's been so much fun for me to finally podcast about them because I don't normally get a chance to. So that's all over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But of course, the most important shout out is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that is all the time I have on this episode of Still Loading. Dave, thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you, man.
And I will see you all next time.